talk by Mr. Howie Severino. This is actually a class project of grade 12 Media and Information Literacy, but Mrs. Villanueva decided that the other grade levels would greatly benefit from this, okay? So I'll start. Let's all stand up first for an opening prayer. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you and we praise you for today. Thank you for this chance, Lord, that you gave us, Lord, to listen to a very powerful speaker, Lord God. May we pray, Lord, that may you be in our midst, Lord. Help us, Lord, to really listen. Help us to understand what will be said, Lord God. And we pray for our speaker. Give him the wisdom, give him the grace, Lord God, to know what to say, Lord. Also pray for the students that they may really learn from this, that they may listen and they may be able to apply this in their lives, Lord. We thank you and we praise you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you. Sit down. Okay, our speaker today, I've known him for quite a while. Okay, that's how ancient I am. But anyway, our speaker today has always wanted to be a journalist ever since he was in grade school. So he spent his high school at the Ateneo de Manila University, and then he graduated from Tufts University in Massachusetts, magna cum laude, with a degree in history. He then received his master's degree in environment, development, and policy from the University of Sussex in the UK. While he was studying in Boston, he met then Noynoy Aquino, who was in exile with his family. Now, in 1983, when former Senator Benigno Aquino Jr. was assassinated, he came back home to the Philippines, joined the anti-Marcos movement, and because of that, he was arrested, along with Ben Cervantes and a couple of his friends, and he got detained for 8 days here in Fort Bonifacio, when Fort Bonifacio was still a military camp and not the place that it is today, okay? But the call of journalism was too strong for a speaker, so he started off as a newspaper reporter and magazine writer, eventually becoming one of the co-founders of the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, where they investigated all the corrupt practices and the things that were happening in the government. From the PCIJ, he moved to television, where he joined the probe team with Cheche Lazaro. He stayed there for 4 years, making documentaries, and if I remember correctly, you interviewed me once about the Chinese religion and all those things in the Philippines. Okay. Anyway, from the probe team, he moved to GMA News, where he became one of the original hosts of Eyewitness, the longest-running documentary program here in the country. He also became editor-in-chief of GMA News Online, where they pioneered crowdsourcing, the Scooper, Twitter for breaking news, and they use the Google Maps for disaster coverage. And right now, he's one of the 6 pillars of the News and Public Affairs. He's also been elevated to the Rotary Club of Manila's Journalism Hall of Fame because of his being awarded Broadcast Journalist of the Year twice and Investigative Journalist of the Year twice. In his spare time, when he's not busy with work, he happily spends time with his wife, environmental lawyer Ipat Luna, and their son Alon. On the side, he also is relearning and teaching the younger generation the alibata. Baybayin, okay? So without further ado, I'd like to present to you our esteemed speaker, Mr. Howie Severino.
Good morning, thank you. Thank you, Richelle. Gosh, all of that really makes me feel old. I'm glad you mentioned that last line where I also have a family, aside from being a professional journalist and media practitioner. I have a son, 17 years old, who's about as old as many of you. So I like to think that I've kept myself young through trying to manage a teenager at home. But so a lot of what I'm going to be telling you is stuff I've already shared with my own son as I've been raising him. And I'm going to be compressing modern technology history in about 2 minutes, because that's the context of a lot of the other stuff I'm going to be sharing with you today. So I'm projecting this image here. Is there a way to kill the stage lights? So, okay, thank you. Does anyone remember what this is? Does anyone, first of all, does anyone still have one of these devices at home? Okay, okay. So, wow, a very tiny minority still have landline telephones, but you still have these. You don't remember this. It's mostly push button now, right? So has anyone used this kind of phone? Okay. Well, for much of my life, that was how I communicated with other people. It's only been in the last 20 or so years, older than your lives, that we've been using cell phones. But for much of my life, this is the kind of communications device that we use. And it actually represents a lifestyle. This is the original chatting device. The word chat means to talk. Has nothing to do with the keyboard. That's the original definition. And this is the original chatting device. Most Filipinos, or nearly all Filipinos, during this time, communicated verbally. We weren't really a writing culture. But technology has made us all writers. Okay. And it didn't start with cell phones. It started with another device. But this device, as I said, it's the original chatting device, and it enabled us to be verbal with people even far away. But we were mostly verbal. That's why yung history natin was, a big part of our history is oral history. A big part of our literature is oral literature, oral storytelling. So, itong original chatting device, people used it to do what my generation used to call telebabad, where we'll be chatting, actual talking, for hours with our best friend, with somebody we're courting, with our siblings, etc., etc. It was actually on the phone for hours chatting, because there was no other way of communicating. Until this device came along. Does anyone remember this? All right. Of course, I don't think, maybe some of the teachers remember using it. Yes, some of the teachers remember. The original texting device is the pager. All right, I'm just going to explain. This is how professionals, especially professionals, and some of you who have parents and grandparents who are doctors, know this very well. Because before cell phones, this is how they would be notified, especially if they're urgent or emergency cases. Magbeep. That's why the pager was also called the beeper. Magbeep yan, and then you get a message on your pager or your beeper telling you, oh, rush to the hospital because there's an emergency patient. Oh, like for me, a journalist, I used to walk around with a pager because that's how I used to get information about my next appointment. Okay, go to this place because you're going to be interviewing this person. I would be reading this. But how is that message sent? We didn't have devices to send messages. What we would do is we would call on the original chatting device, a landline telephone, to dictate our message to an operator, a pager operator, who would encode it in some central office and then send the message to the pager destination. Again, if I wanted to send a message to somebody's pager, to send an important message, I would call up an operator and dictate on the telephone what I wanted to say. So you could probably figure out the danger of that. The danger of that is if you have a weird accent or a different accent, or if you're speaking very fast, or if the operator is sleepy, they could be understanding you or hearing you differently from what you're intending. So sometimes strange messages come out. Okay? For example, I did a call out. I called out on my Facebook asking old-timers if they remember any pager boo-boos. So these are real pager boo-boos. I'll just share a couple with you. Okay, yung pag-dictate, what are your plans tonight? When the pager holder received the message, it said, water our plants tonight. Okay? That's fairly harmless. Okay, it could actually be more damaging. Okay? There was one time, The dictated message to the pager operator was, I really enjoyed it last night. Wish you were here. When it appeared on the recipient's pager, there was a letter missing. I really enjoyed it last night. Wish you were her. Okay. This is a real occurrence. Share with me. I don't know what happened to that relationship, but I'm sure there was some explaining that had to be done. No, I'm just leading to a main point here, where your messaging wasn't, the fate of your messages were not entirely in your hands. It was in the hands of some operator who maybe have been hard of hearing, could be sleepy on the job, etc. In 1995, Pope John Paul II visited Manila. Okay, we've had only several papal visits to the Philippines ever. Okay, they don't usually come to the Philippines because it's kind of far. So Pope John Paul II visited twice. So this is one of his visits, 1995. Okay, I want you to remember this image. Take a very close look, and you must know, if you look at it hard enough, that people are not doing something that they would normally be doing today. Okay? 20 years later, Pope Francis visited the Philippines. Okay? People are not waving. People are no longer waving. Here, people are waving. Why? Because everyone's holding a cell phone. Of course, if you wave with your cell phone, it's not going to be a very good picture. Going back 20 years before, everyone is like, hey Pope, look at me. They're just saying hello. But there are very few pictures that capture that moment. 20 years later, this is what you have. Everyone has an image. Okay, this is the Pope passing. I didn't even get a good look because he was passing with all these people in front of me. But I got a picture of the crowd taking a photo of the Pope, Pope Francis, passing in front of the Cultural Center on Rojas Boulevard. Okay, this is my first main point. You now have power over your own communications. Yung chatting device, the landline. When I was growing up, around your age, we had a landline. It was the only way to communicate. Wala pang cellphone, wala pang internet, wala pang ang fax machine in those days. We had a landline with a party line. Does anyone know what a party line is? Okay, see, Rochelle knows. Okay, good. We had a party line where we had to share. There were so few telephone lines in the Philippines that you had to share the same telephone line with a neighbor who most of the time you didn't even know who that neighbor was. So you would be using the same line. Sometimes you'd pick up the phone and that person would be talking to somebody else and you'd say, party line, I need to use the phone. Okay? And sometimes you'd be using the phone and she or he would pick up the phone and say, party line, this is very urgent, I need the phone. So minsan mag-aaway pa kayo because your phone call is also important. So you didn't completely have control over your own communications in those days. Today you do. Let's talk about this. So one source of power is you don't have to go through any operator. You can communicate directly to one person, through texting, messaging, etc., or to many, through Twitter, through comments on Facebook, etc., etc. And the mobile internet, meaning our phones, our smartphones, has turned us all into writers. As I said, through most of our history, actually through most of global history anywhere, humans were mostly talkers. We communicated through talking. Very few of us were actually professional writers, or very few of us would write every day. Unless it's for school, unless you were really avid letter writers. But very few of us would actually write every day. The mobile internet has made us all into writers. Texting is a form of writing. Emailing is writing. Posting on Facebook is writing. Tweeting is writing. But it's writing on the internet is what you call informal writing. It's informal. Kasi minsan di na sinusunod yung grammar. Minsan you invent rules on the spot. Minsan you invent words that only your barkado or your group understand. So what you're doing every day is informal writing compared to formal writing. Formal writing is books, magazines, newspapers, where certain rules are always followed. Informal writing is much more casual, it's much more instantaneous, it's much more internal within certain groups. Okay, what do I mean by this? All right. So, informal language or internet language is also called chat speak. And that is the bulk of the writing that is happening today. It's not writing of books or people like me, where I write scripts, I write articles for our website, etc. We're a very, very small number. The vast majority of people who are writing chat speak. You're writing chat speak on texting, you're writing chat speak on Messenger, writing chat speak on as you comment on Facebook, etc., etc. It's internet writing. That's very, very informal. So, formal written language is to inform, to educate, and to demonstrate knowledge. It's a lot of the writing that you're doing in class, the way you're being taught. But internet language is mainly to connect. You're not trying to impress people most of the time. You're just connecting. You're interacting. And there's something that makes this unique. There are some things that make this unique. Okay? And one of them is, all right, internet language uses what we call, what? Emojis. Okay? In linguistics, it's called emblems or gestures. Internet language is the first language that integrates, combines words with symbols. Symbols that represent body language. Now this is something you've grown up with, so you take this for granted. But for me, a lot of this is something that's just new to this generation, to this new generation of language users. This is a new way of communicating. And yet it's not being studied very widely, if at all. There are very few linguists who are studying chat speak and the way emblems are being used. Diba? We all know what these mean. They all mean different things to different people, but we use them. Diba? It's not just the faces and body language that we use. We're also using letters in new ways. It's also part of chat speak. Okay. So chat speak loves coded abbreviations. Okay? So I'm going to test your knowledge of... Okay, some of these are easy. OMG, of course. TMI. Too much information. Of course, OOTD. Outfit of the day. WYWH. Wish you were here. LOL. Laughing out loud. Time, T-I-M-E. Can you guess? Or maybe you have a whole new set of abbreviations to use. This is kind of old already. Tears in my eyes. All right. Another set. This whole genre of chat speak using abbreviations started with teenagers, and then adopted later by adults, and then used by the same teenagers as they became adults, and now it's become mainstream. Everyone uses this, even some of our grandparents, titas, titos, we all abbreviate because we're in a hurry, and sometimes we don't want others to understand. So, abbreviated chat speak began with teenagers. And why did they use abbreviations? Because they were trying to create a secret code that their parents would not understand. Because why? Early on, and not just now, even early on in the internet, parents were trying to monitor what their kids were doing on the internet. Because there's a lot of danger there. So parents tend to snoop, they tend to look, sino bang kausap nito? Is there a pedophile out there and that they're talking to, etc. Alright. So, kung may kausap ka na fellow teen or classmate, and you knew that your parents were aware that you were communicating with somebody that they didn't know, and you were conscious of it, and you didn't want your parents to know what you're talking about, you would have to warn the person you're communicating with that there's a parent around. So, they created this. PAH is parent at home. Okay. PAW, sorry, parent at work. Okay. Wait, parent? Tama ba yan? PITR, parent in the room. PBB, parent behind back. POSCS, parent over shoulder change subject. Okay? KPC, keep parent clueless. So that's how it began, because unfortunately parents are also quick to catch on. So lagi nag-evolve yung chat speak. But it really began with people like you. Chat speak really began with young people because kayo yung mga digital natives. That's why you're also called, teenagers are also called the digital avant-garde. Okay, so now parents are using teen code. YOLO, okay. I know, right? Mind your own business. In my humble opinion. Fix or it didn't happen. Okay, when do you do this? When do you put this? Kung may mamalaki, somebody's boasting about, hey, I caught the biggest fish when I went fishing. It's just a comment. It's just a post on Facebook. Eh, walang letrato. No one's gonna believe you. So, post a picture or it didn't happen. Ganun lang yun. I met, diba? Famous basketball player. But walang picture, so it didn't happen. Alright. Can you guess? Take care, because I care. Alright, so, how you use chat speak also reveals a little bit about your personality. Before, in formal language, you had to write a lot of words before you could actually reveal your personality. Now, your choices, your chat speak choices reveal your personality. So are you a ha-ha person or a he-he or a he-he? Okay. Or a ha-ha-ha, di ba? So it matters, di ba? Or would you rather use a smiling face or a, di ba? I mean, dami mong choices eh. But there are people who analyze your choices and kind of guess, okay, he's a ha-ha, no, he's a he-he kind of person. Okay. Are you a hoo-hoo or Hoo, di ba? Parang, okay, naiwanan ako, hoo. Are you yes or yes or yes? Alright? How many exclamation points do you like to use? Okay? What does that mean when you use 10 exclamation points? Why will you make the effort? Parang OA. Well, a lot of people do. There are people who message all caps and they're not angry. Why? Di ba? Okay, why? Like LOL, all caps, LOL, small letters. Is there a difference? The linguists say there is a difference. There's already a book about all this. That's where I got this information. Okay. Even how you express a simple expression, mahal kita. Okay. What is it? Is there a difference when you put a period? In messaging, a lot of times you don't use punctuation, but when you use punctuation, does it change the tone? Diba? It does. Or, if you use mahal kita with a sad face, Baka binasted ka, kaya may ganyan, di ba? Or, mahal kita with all these exclamation points. Baka nangliligaw pa lang, di ba? Mahal kita, LOL. Okay. Nangangalas ka, di ba? Nangangalas ka, di ba? So, the whole meaning can change with just a few symbols or letters. Mahal kita, OMG! Okay. Alright. So, this is your world. You are the digital avant-garde. Okay? You set the trends. Before, you just used to follow. People like me wrote textbooks, and you just had to follow the rules in the textbooks. No, now, adults are looking at what the kinds of languages you are inventing, and we're adapting it to our own because we want to be understood too by the mainstream. And what the digital avant-garde, like yourselves, ano ba yung avant-garde? You're trailblazers. You're the ones who invent these things. Then it becomes mainstream. And then people like me are catching up. All of you are writers. You're not just talkers, you're also writers. I cannot say when I was your age, everyone in my generation were writers. No. But we were all talkers, but everyone in your generation, you're all writers. When you text, when you comment, when you chat, you're writing. You're all writers. You create new forms of written language. And you have control over your own communications. These are aspects of your generation that were not present in my generation. That's what makes you different. Okay. Ang bottom line nito, you are the most empowered generation in history. You have no way of comparing because you take this for granted. I do. My generation, Michelle mentioned, I grew up in martial law, and during martial law, I was even jailed. I had no power. We lived with censorship. We had no freedom of expression, no freedom of the press, no freedom of assembly. We were very disempowered. You have a lot of these freedoms that you were born with. And the freedoms are magnified with technology. So you've got two sources of power. You've got your democratic rights, because we're not living under a dictatorship right now, at least not yet. And you have technology in your hands. I have technology right now in my pocket. Alright, so the flip side of power is, what did Spider-Man's uncle say, with great power comes responsibility. Okay, so this is where we're going to talk about how technology should be used. And I'm going to talk about the current information ecosystem. Okay, so we're all part of the information ecosystem, whether we like it or not. As long as you have technology in your hands, as long as you use texting, as long as you email, etc., we are living in a technology and information ecosystem. What is this? And a big aspect of our ecosystem is an information war. We are involved in an information war. You could be victims, you could be survivors, but you could also be perpetrators. How you use information, magnified by technology, determines your identity online. Are you just a plain user, an innocent, a predator, a bully, a victim, or a responsible communicator online? Alright, so one category of players is what I call the truth tellers or the fact seekers. Journalists, teachers, educators, we have no interest in spreading lies. We're teaching you how to gather evidence, evaluate evidence, and make up your own mind based on evidence. Evidence that we presume is true. Kasi evidence is the basis of fact. Diba? If you have evidence to back up something, then it becomes fact. Like climate change. 20 years of scientific research has produced evidence that proves climate change. So climate change is a fact. Researchers. So truth-telling, fact-seeking is a public service. Educating you is a service to our society, not just to you and your families. We're trying to turn you into responsible citizens. To me, my standing up here, accepting the invitation of your school, to me is a public service. I'm not just serving the school. I want I'm trying to help develop responsible citizens by standing on this stage. I am a fact seeker. I like to think I'm a truth teller. On the other side of this war is what I would call information weaponizers. People who use information not to seek facts, not to educate, not to tell the truth, but as weapons. Information as weapons. There are many, many people out there. You need to be aware that there are many people out there. This is not an innocent world. There are many, many people out there in cyberspace involved in an information war. And they're doing bad things. Okay? They have weaponized information. How have they done that? By spreading malicious propaganda. Propaganda is not necessarily true. Often it's not true. They are engaged in information war to deceive and intimidate. And they use fake news, or what we call disinformation. Journalists use the word disinformation now because political leaders have subverted or hijacked the term fake news to attack people who are seeking the truth. If there are a lot of political leaders out there in this world who will call journalists peddlers of fake news because they disagree with our findings. So, we don't want to further confuse you by using the same term, so we tend to use the word disinformation. What is the goal of information weaponizers? It's not the truth. It's political power. That's the goal. It's not facts or the truth. Gaining political power and seizing political power and retaining political power, that's their goal. So, if their goal is not the truth, what is their highest value? It's loyalty. It's not just loyalty to the government, it's loyalty to the frat, it's loyalty to the tribe. You will lie to protect your group. You will lie to protect certain interests. But there will come a time when you have to choose. Do I choose the truth or do I choose loyalty? That's the main crossroads for a lot of people. Okay. I have to tell you, a lot of times I feel that journalists, fact seekers, truth tellers, educators who are trying to teach you to love the truth, we're losing. We're losing this war. Because the share of the internet, of the weaponizers is getting bigger and bigger. It's being orchestrated. There are lots of troll operations that are being well funded, and they're gaining more and more of the share of your attention. Fact seekers and truth tellers are being attacked by propagandists with new weapons such as disinformation. What's the price of all this? Public opinion. Hearts and minds. Pretty soon you're all going to be voters. You're going to be targeted. You're going to be targeted by fake news. You're going to be targeted. If you say something on the internet that's going against somebody's interest, you're going to be attacked. You got to be ready for it. Voters, citizens, the digital avant-garde. They want you. The information weaponizers. The information war is a battle for your hearts and minds. There are millions and millions of people your age. Pretty soon, you're going to be adults making big decisions, not just about yourselves, but about society. As voters, as consumers, as leaders of companies, as professionals, as educators, etc. Alright, Philippines. We're in big trouble. Facebook, who has a good idea, good sense of what's going on in the rest of the world, calls us patient zero. We are patient zero in the realm of fake news. If fake news is a worldwide virus or disease, Facebook has called us patient zero. Simply because there's more of it here, more of it's being manufactured here, and more people in the Philippines believe it. Believe fake news than a lot of other countries. Now, why do people share fake news? Why? One, they don't know any better. They're not careful. It was shared by leaders, relatives, or friends. people that you trust, people that you live with, people that you love. It was shared by them, your titas, titos, lolos, lolos. They're sharing fake news. Therefore, you're, without much thinking, you're also sharing the same thing. Now, the third reason is, to me, the worst. People sharing fake news know it's false, but they agree with it, so they share it anyway, even if they know it's false. As I said, the truth matters less to them than loyalty. If they agree with somebody or with something, even if it's not true, even if it's a lie, they will share it because they're loyal to that kind of thinking. And I think that's why you're in this school, why you're being educated. So you don't do this. So you don't help in spreading lies. So you don't help us, this country, remain patient zero in the world of fake news. All right. So I'm actually preaching to the choir. Most of you know. Most of you don't share fake news. You're too smart. You're the digital avant-garde. It's older people who are sharing fake news. It's your parents, titos, titas, lolos, and lolas. Most of you are not. I think most of you would know better. But going home, maybe you can start a conversation in your home about disinformation, about spreading fake news. Or maybe you can gently correct people in your family, people in your circles, who are spreading what you know is a falsehood. There are lots of people out there who are denying climate change, for example. There are some people out there who still think the world is flat. Kindly remind them of scientific facts. Kindly remind them that there is evidence disproving already what they are spreading. You need to be part of the truth universe and you must push back. To me, the truth universe includes a school, includes news organizations, includes journalists. We're part of the truth universe. We're trying to make you value the truth, and that's what you should spread. We have this campaign for a very long time. Think before you click. Before, when the internet was new, Twitter was new, Facebook was new, people would just share mindlessly. They weren't thinking. We've been encouraging them through all kinds of campaigns to think before you share anything. Think before you comment. Think before you shop online. Think before you spend anything. Think before you risk anything, before you say anything, before you use profanity online. It can come back and haunt you, especially when you're applying to a new school, when you're applying for a job. Part of my job at my TV station is to interview people who are applying for jobs. What we do is we look at their CV, we interview them, but we also research them on social media. So if they're doing crazy stuff on social media, like drinking until they get drunk in public, chances are we're not going to be hiring these people. So be very careful about what you say and do on social media. So you need to verify. That's the number one thing. Kami sa journalism, we have a certain saying. Aside from checking the source of information for reliability, check for corroboration, is it being disputed? Don't be gullible. Ano being gullible? Don't be easily fooled. Develop your own methods of verification. Kami mga mamamayan, journalists have a saying. Even if your mother tells you she loves you, verify. Okay? Of course, it's an exaggeration, it's extreme, but we need to take verification to an extreme because there's so much falsehood out there. We should always be skeptical of the stuff that we're reading. But as I said, there are people who know something is false, but they will spread it anyway. They will repeat it anyway. So this really comes down to is not simply thinking before you click, but examining what your values are. Because there are a lot of people out there using the internet who do not value the truth. I'm here to remind you that the truth is still the highest value. It's higher than loyalty. It's higher than loyalty to government. It's higher than loyalty to a fraternity. The truth. The truth sometimes can be painful, but it's still the truth. All right. So, This is our mantra. Don't love lies. Love the truth. Love the truth even when it contradicts what you believe. There are certain things that you thought, you assumed were like this, then you saw the evidence to disprove it. Then be open-minded enough to change your view, change your opinion, change your belief. Because you found the truth. You found facts. Love the truth even when it's different from what our leaders say. I've learned as a journalist, all governments lie. They don't lie all the time, but they all lie. No matter what country you're in, they all lie. Because they're trying to protect their power. As citizens, educators, journalists, we have to see through the lies and try to get at the truth. Love the truth even when it goes against what our friends and relatives say. Don't believe something just because our friends and relatives are saying it. Be independent-minded enough to think for yourselves and to insist on the truth even when others don't believe it. Love the truth so much you will work extremely hard to find it. That's why people like me, I covered the war in Marawi 3 times. We were risking our lives. My cameraman, my producer, my whole team, we risked our lives in Marawi. Why? Because we wanted to find out the truth. If our job was just to lie, create disinformation or fake news, we don't have to go to Marawi. We can just sit in our bedrooms and pretend we went to Marawi and cover that war and just invent it. Invent the story. No, what we wanted to, we worked extremely hard to find out the truth because we love the truth. And finally, love the truth even when it hurts. Okay. This can apply to a lot of things. It can apply to kind of your illusions can be shattered. A relationship can end for good reasons that you may not want to face. But sometimes you have to conclude that you're really not meant to be. That's also part of the truth. And you have to face it. You have to love that truth, even when it hurts. All right. Now, we started out with some easy chat speak. Okay, some of you are getting it. Again. What do I want to do? Draw. All right. What do I want to do when I grow up? Okay, some of you are almost grown up, okay? Consider this option. Kasi, ito talaga yung crossroads eh. And I think that's why you went to this particular school, so you make the right choice. But even after you graduate, you're not going to be forced to make the right choice. You have to make the choice. You have to make the right choice on your own. So you always have options. But consider this one. Wherever you are, wherever you go, make it a better place. Thank you.
Mr. Severino, we'll open the floor to questions. Whoever wants to ask questions, can I request for an extra mic? Okay. Teachers and students may ask questions. Anyone? Who wants to start? Okay, as a start, Mr. Severino, given the current political climate and perilous times that we're in, what is one thing that you can tell these young generation, especially when they're faced with stories or with things that are happening and it doesn't seem to make sense, or it doesn't seem to make sense? what should they do? Or how should they go about deciphering what is true and what is not?
All right, probably just two pieces of simple advice. One is get your information from trusted sources. Get your news from trusted sources. Established news organizations. There are a lot of websites out there that are newly created, but trying to create viral information, and it reaches you. And if you're not thinking very much, you might believe it and even spread it. So that's one. Go to trusted sources of information. People you trust. Okay. It doesn't have to be your parents. It could be a teacher that you know is well read, makes sense, has the right values. The same thing with websites, news organizations. So get your information from trusted sources. The second one is, and may be hard, no? But go on a social media diet. Meaning, approach it the way you would a healthy diet. It doesn't necessarily mean consuming less information. It just means being choosy about the information you consume. So yung concept ng social media diet. Because like as in food, as in the consumption of food, you could also be consuming information without much control, without much discernment, without any kind of choosiness. But if you are choosing your information sources the way you choose healthy food, or the way you're choosing your food choices, I think you'll be a much better rounded person. And a social media diet can also include occasional fasting. It can also mean occasional time away from social media. Because the default these days is almost unregulated, uncontrolled immersion in social media. And actually, when I give talks to just teachers or even adults or even librarians, like next week I'm giving a talk to a group of librarians. I have to tell you, I talked to adults today about the mental health crisis of young people. There is a mental health crisis among young people. You may not be too aware of it, and I'm not saying all of you are undergoing a crisis, but doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists are saying that they're seeing more and more young patients who are exhibiting signs of mental health issues that previous generations were not experiencing. And they think it's being caused by immersion in social media. Why? Social media, there are already studies that show that social media is a source of a lot of anxiety, stress, loneliness. Imagine, ironically, social media leads to loneliness. It's true. You're very vulnerable to that. And it leads to depression. And even worse, sometimes. So go on to social media. I'm not telling you get off social media, because like for someone like me, I cannot get off social media. I need it for professional reasons. But maybe a lot of you use it to connect with family members who are overseas, and I don't blame you. But be very choosy. And don't forget the other things you could be doing with your time. So I think if you're just very discerning about your use of social media, I think you'll have a much better rounded life. And I think you will be healthier mentally and even physically, because you'll get more sleep. A lot of young people now don't get enough sleep because they sleep with their phones. And it's always notifying them, and always blinking, it's always lighting up. And there's always somebody to chat with. So don't go to bed with your phones.
Thank you. Any questions? Teachers, you might want to ask something? Okay.
I just want to know because I'm sorry.
Thank you. Sir, I'm sure you have encountered situation when you're interviewing a subject and you feel that the subject is not telling the truth. How do you deal with that situation? And another is, after you have interviewed the subject and you try to validate or verify the information given, you found out that the subject is not telling the truth. How do you deal with the two situations as a journalist?
Well, number one, before we do any interview, we try to prepare as much as possible, so that it's easier to know that someone may not be telling you the truth. But the truth is very often hard to come by. So somebody might be telling you something that's not true, and you may not even know yet that it's untrue, and you'll find out later on. So what we do is, you have to give everyone a chance to explain their side, even if it's not true. But if it's not true, you have a responsibility to tell your audience, your viewers, or your listeners that what you were just told is untrue, based on, you cannot just say that as a matter of opinion, based on this body of evidence. So, it can be painful because sometimes people get mad at you. Nobody wants to be called a kind of a liar or even a spreader of falsehood, but that's what people like me signed up for. We need to seek facts, and if somebody is not telling us the truth, we have to call them out. And that's why now it's more important than ever. And a lot of news organizations now have full-time fact-checking operations, because there's so many statements being spread, even by powerful people, that are not true. For example, President Donald Trump, there's a count now by the Washington Post that he's up to something like 6,000 or 7,000 lies spread through Twitter and speeches, and so because they know that there's a pattern of falsehood, they have to check everything that he's saying. So ganon. Doesn't mean that they're silencing his voice. Okay, President Trump is saying this, but the facts say otherwise. That's what news organizations do.
Sir, how much harder is it to be a journalist now, with all these truths and untruths compared to how it was a couple years ago?
It's so much harder now for a lot of reasons. Number one, well, it's harder, but it's also more exhilarating, because there's so many more sources of information now because of the internet. And you don't have to go to libraries anymore. You can just research online. There's a lot of convenience, but there's also a much greater need now to be skeptical about everything. You have to be skeptical. You can't just believe things. And there's so much more work involved because there's so much more information out there. So that's one. There's so much more information that you need to verify that's out there. Number two, our role in society is being questioned by people in power. Generally, people in power don't like to be questioned, but previously, in previous times, people in power accepted our role. But now, a lot of people in power around the world no longer accept the role of professional journalists, because in fact there are those in this country who say there's no more need for professional journalists because there's Facebook. I can get all the information I need from Facebook. Why do I need Howie Severino to get facts for me? I can just search Facebook and find information there that I want to believe. Anyway, the facts that he produces, I don't like. So again, it goes back to the point of what do we really value? Do we value just things that we agree with? Or will we also value what we disagree with if it's true? That's what I'm saying. I mean, we have to value the truth, even if it's something that is offensive or it disagrees with us or it's insulting. It's the truth. So we need to value it, and it has to be part of our decision making about our lives.
Hi, sir. Good morning. I have a question. How do we respond if the reliable sources of information or media organizations give us information or true, but pretty much not really for some, or at least for those who are thinking, are not, paano ba, hindi word of the time to talk about. So for example, how should we respond if the reliable sources of information becomes the tool for disinformation perhaps, or a version of attention? So because, well, for past events, in my opinion, there were some issues that does not deserve airtime, where the reliable organizations give so much airtime to these issues. So how do we respond to that? Ayoko nang i-cite yung information. Okay lang ba mag...
I think he's talking about the Barreto thing.
Yeah, thanks for that question. No, I mean, and that's been called out by a lot, no? It started out with, we really want to go into this. It started out with, the Barreto sisters are very prominent in show business, and they also happen to be partners of very powerful men. Okay, so they are kind of borderline newsmakers in that sense. They're influencers. Okay, so, but what made them newsmakers was when their father died and the president showed up at the wake. Now, most news organizations, especially reliable ones, will regard most of what a president does as news. So if a president, the way President Duterte, for example, tried to create a reconciliation between sisters, a lot of news organizations thought that was news. Why? Imagine a president getting involved in this family squabble. I mean, it's the president. You wouldn't say, I mean, a family squabble may not have been worth reporting, but the president felt it was important for him to show up and try to create this reconciliation. So we thought that was news. Okay? And then the fact that there was some physical, maybe we can even call it violence between sisters, between family members, where the president's bodyguards had to intervene. So it was almost like a kind of a danger to the president. That also made it news. Unfortunately, it kind of branched out into all kinds of stories already that got a lot of airtime, including like very long interviews with members of the family, etc. And it became a very tabloid story. But I think that's where it went overboard, in my opinion also. But it started out, I think, as legitimate news. It may not have been the most important news, but if the president was not involved, it might have just been a very minor news. It may not have been news. But if you consider that most everything that the president says or does can qualify as news, I think this issue of the Barreto sisters began as news and then ended up as kind of tabloid content that may have been given too much airtime in the news. So it's a very difficult call. But news, unfortunately, is also big business. And that those very lengthy interviews with the Barreto sisters attracted huge audiences. Like out of maybe a 45-minute newscast, one interview took almost 20 minutes. It was bigger than, the water crisis, it was bigger than traffic, it was bigger than all kinds of things. Imagine. So basically, it was it was an exaggeration of the importance of this particular issue. And I think that's what you're driving at.
So sir, would it be fair to have a certain level of skepticism even to the established news organization as the receiver or as the consumer of this information? And at the same time, would it also be, how do we strike that balance between, okay, news give us what we should know, and what should we know as audience? Or what should we consume so that we are given quality information as well? So yung ganong dynamics niya.
Yeah. The first question, should you be skeptical? Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're not God. I mean, we make mistakes. And we exaggerate. I mean, I can go on and on about the foibles or the problems of media. But this I can say, most of us journalists did not go into this line of work to spread lies and even to exaggerate or to become propagandists. We went into this line of work for noble reasons. Aside from being a good job, it's also a public service. And because most of us love the truth. But yes, you should be skeptical because we make mistakes. And you should call us out. And we do. We get called out more now than ever because there's so many ways of calling us out. You can call us out through Twitter, through social media. People criticize us all the time. And it makes us better. So what can I advise about how to consume the news is have a wide array of, as I said, I mean, part of this concept of having a diet of information, it's a media diet, not just social media diet, it's a media diet, is having balance. So, get some information from the Kapamilya channel, get some from the Kapuso channel, get some from online news, get some from international news. Ako personally, I watch ABS, I watch TV5, I watch our own channel, I watch also CNN, I watch BBC, I read the New York Times, I read the Washington Post, I read bloggers that are very critical. I read columnists that are pro-government. I read columnists who are anti-government. I read editorials. I mean, to me, not just as a professional news person, but as a responsible citizen, and not just a responsible Filipino citizen, I'm a global citizen. I have to be aware of what's happening in our country and around the world. So I like to think I strive to have a balanced information diet. So I think that's what I can advise, is don't just go for one source of news, but have a wide-ranging, balanced information diet, and then make up your own mind. Come to your own conclusions, make your own judgments, and I think you'll be a much better person for it.
Thank you. We have a question here.
So, what if the truth causes more problems and it brings out more damage to you and the people around you? And what if the revelation of the truth can potentially ruin someone's life?
All right, well, that's an excellent question. Thank you. All right, I'll repeat it. Okay, what if the news ruins people's lives? What if it can actually do more damage than good? We wrestle with this all the time. Not everything that's true should make the news. Not everything that's true should be given importance. Not everything that's true and important should be shared with the public. I'll give you some examples. We never reveal the identities of rape victims. Never. That's our policy. Sometimes it'll come out on social media, etc., and sometimes the rape victim will himself or herself talk about it, but our policy is we do not. Why? Because we know that it can create a stigma for that person, can damage that person's reputation for the rest of her life. Okay? We generally do not identify child victims of crime, especially sexual crime, because we don't want to ruin that person's reputation the rest of her life. We don't want to traumatize that child. Okay? There are a lot of other examples. And there are examples also of news or information that is shared by news organizations that maybe should not be shared. For example, I know that in other countries, let's say in Scandinavia, like in Sweden, New Zealand, for example, where if there is a suspect of a crime, they will not reveal the name of that suspect until the judicial process is over and that person has been declared guilty or innocent. They will keep that identity secret. That is not the practice in the Philippines. Dito, somebody will just say, oh, that suspect yun. The media will tend to already identify that person as if that person is guilty. Personally, I don't agree with that. I think everyone deserves a presumption of innocence, and if you're innocent, you should not be identified as if you're already guilty. So it's an issue that we're constantly wrestling with. But those are clear-cut cases. The children, the rape victims. Sometimes, for example, these allegations about politicians you hear on the news. One politician will accuse another politician, or one police general will accuse another police general. We don't really know if it's true, but the accusations are aired, and a lot of people believe the accusations, and they may not be true. But already this person's reputation has already been harmed, and sometimes they are forced to resign, even if it hasn't been true, been proven true. So again, that is a problem in our information ecosystem that we need to address and we need to cure. And I hope people like you and some of the other discerning people in the audience grow up to become communications professionals and journalists, because those problems need to be solved. And maybe my generation is not going to solve them. Maybe it's going to be solved by your generation. I hope.
Any more questions? Okay, Abraham.
What do you think of the Raptor issue? Like the government is somehow attacking it. Also, is this just all of the government, or is there an actual wrongdoing on the part of Raptor?
Okay, the question by Abraham is, he's asking me about the Rappler case or issue with the government. And is it just a ploy by the government? Okay. I'm trying to think of a relatively clear way of explaining this. It can be a very technical issue. Let me just tell you, well, first of all, it's in the courts. Okay? So, what I'm saying could even be sub judice. Maybe Rochelle can explain to you in media literacy class what sub judice is, but I shouldn't be talking public. Anyway, this is not a public, this is a private activity. If a case is still pending in the courts, if I talk about it publicly, I can be accused of trying to influence the case. But I'll just share with you, since this is a private activity. My view is, if Rappler was not critical of the government's policies, and I think it's part of a news organization or journalist's responsibility to be critical of government in a democracy. You need a check and balance. And Rappler was especially critical of the way the drug war was being conducted. If Rappler was not critical of the government may not have filed this case against Rappler. Now, the case is still pending in the court, and for all we know, Rappler, as a for-profit corporation, could actually be guilty of some corporate infraction, but would it be receiving this kind of attention from government prosecutors or the Justice Department if it was not a critic of the government? In other words, is the government being very, very selective in terms of how it's using the judicial system? Because there are lots of guilty parties, and I'm sure there are companies that are doing a lot of crazy things that are not being investigated in this way. So that's what we have to think about. Is Rappler being targeted because it's been critical? My own belief is there are lots of corporations in this country that are violating rules. Because there's so many rules, it's easy to violate, even if you don't know that you're violating. And most of these companies are not being investigated by the government. So those companies that are being investigated by the government may be doing things that are attracting this kind of attention from the government. So in that case, yes, it could be a ploy. And the government may actually be looking for vulnerabilities. For example, if I suddenly became very critical of the government, somebody in the government might be saying, hey, can you look to see if this Howie Severino is paying all of his taxes on time and paying his taxes down to the last centavo? I think if the government paid that kind of attention to anybody, they would find something. So what that's communicating, what the government is communicating in its case against Rappler is, if you're critical of the drug war, we can do this to you. So there are others who might privately be disagreeing with policies of the government, but they're holding back because ayaw nilang ma-Rappler. I've heard this. Ayaw naming ma-Rappler. Diba? Parang it's a lesson. And that's what media people call a chilling effect. A chilling effect. A chilling effect occurs when you are afraid of the government doing something to you that it's already doing to other people or to other organizations. So if I see, for example, I'm with GMA. Our competition, ABS, is being threatened with being closed down because their franchise expires in March. And if their franchise is not renewed by Congress, which is now pro-president, thousands of people could be out of a job because they're not getting their license. Now, other media organizations like GMA, etc., are looking at the ABS case and saying, I don't want to end up like, I don't want to lose my job. So, is that going to influence the way we think? I don't think anyone will admit it. But do we want to happen to us what is happening to another organization where it could be closed down? Of course not. So how do we avoid that fate? That's in the back of everyone's minds. How do we avoid the fate of Rappler? How do we avoid the fate of all of these so-called suspects that we find dead in the street? How do we avoid that? How do we avoid the fate of Senator De Lima? How do we avoid that? It's not simply, oh, I shouldn't be trafficking in drugs, I shouldn't be... Well, a lot of these people, they could be targeted simply because they're just being critical. So, that's a very sensitive topic, so thank you for asking. But please don't tweet what I said. Yeah.
Has there been any kind of discussion among journalists about creating an organization? Has there been an organization for the corruption in media?
Has there been any discussion about corruption in media?
Creating an organization for the... since there's media,
Yeah.
there's media corruption also.
Yes.
Has there been any kind of organization that checks the corruption, or somehow like an ombudsman instead of the government for purpose?
Yeah. Set up a kind of ombudsman or mechanism to investigate corruption in media. Yeah. Nothing official, but that's a really good question and issue. And yes, there is corruption in media. There's corruption in every sector of society. Let's just put it that way. Whether it's the law, medicine, business, education, media, government. Now, the question is the degrees, and the question is, are there mechanisms to correct the problems in each of these sectors? In media, there have been efforts, there's been discussions, yes, no formal mechanisms the way you have in government, like an ombudsman, where you, like if you have a complaint against a government official, you can go to the ombudsman and file a complaint. There's no place where you can actually go to file a complaint against a media person or personality. But that doesn't mean allegations of media corruption are never aired. You hear about it. Sometimes it's written up. Sometimes it's investigated by fellow journalists, but there's no official body that will do that. Maybe if you become a journalist, that's one of the things you can work on. I mean, that's one of the problems. I mean, yeah, corruption in media. I mean, it's a problem. It's a problem.
Any other questions? If there are no more questions, I think we have to end this. Thank you very much, Mr. Severino. I'd like to call Ms. to hand out our plaque of appreciation and our gift to our speaker.
Well, thank you for your attention and all the great questions. Thank you. You've been a thoughtful and attentive audience.
The plaque of appreciation is presented by MGCNLCA Christian Academy to Mr. Howie Severino, for his talk on Love the Truth, presented this day, November 7, 2019. He also has a book, a devotional book, and a multi-media. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening, for attending. I hope you learned a lot. And we'd just like to request each batch to come up and we'll have a picture taking. Okay? Oh, picture yan, syempre. Or did the teachers wanna be first? No? Teachers muna?